Hello, and welcome to a new episode of From the Honeycomb, a podcast that creates a spark of positive energy. Here we discuss all things architecture, design, to travel, exploring Vastu Shastra with the modern approach, and I especially love connecting with other like-minded women and sharing their story. I am your host, Katerina Burinova, and welcome to From the Honeycomb. Well, welcome to my 1-year anniversary podcast. As if you are a listener who's been around for a while, you've noticed that my intro changed. And so I think with this 1-year anniversary coming up right now and kind of getting comfortable with my voice and my podcast and really what I wanted the theme to be, I've decided to kind of change it up a little bit. And I think I've kind of honed in on what I'm interested in and what this podcast is about. And I'm just really, really excited. It's been 1 year since I launched this podcast. And so today's episode, I'm really just going to reflect on kind of the last year. I have some great questions from you, my listeners, that I cannot wait to answer. And yeah, I'm ready to kind of dive in and celebrate. So let's get started. So as we begin every episode, and have since the very beginning, I like to start the episode by sharing something that we are grateful for in the present moment. And sometimes I've gone deep in some episodes sharing something I'm grateful for, but to keep it kind of lighthearted today before I kind of jump into, the main topic and really reflect on the podcast, I wanted to think of something I'm grateful for that is a little lighthearted today. And last night, for some reason, occurred to me what I could use for today's episode, and I am so grateful for broccolini, the vegetable. Yes, broccolini, the vegetable. I don't know what it is, but I have been obsessed with this vegetable for maybe a year now or something. I don't even know. And for those of you who don't know what broccolini is, it's like broccoli, but it's like a sibling of broccoli. It's like thinner, longer, and there's just it's so good. And then Jesse, my husband, he makes it taste so good where he just kind of fries it with a little garlic and then you dribble some lemon juice on top, and it is so freaking delicious. It's like one of my favorite go-to veggies right now. And so I don't know, there's something about it. I don't know if it's it must be related to broccoli. I don't know. It looks like broccoli, but a thinner, longer version of it. I don't know. And we shop at Trader Joe's, so that's where we found it. And it is just so freaking good. So I'm very, very grateful for this vegetable that has come into my life. So 1 year, I cannot believe, like I've said, I can't believe it's been a year. This year's gone by so quickly, but yet so much has happened, and I feel like I've really grown on such a personal level a lot thanks to this podcast. And so I know typically when we celebrate things on the podcast, I might have a bottle of champagne. Today, I didn't really feel like a bottle of champagne. Also, it's barely the middle of the day, and I have a few things to do after this, including possibly driving. So instead, I have a cup of tea next to me. We are supposed to get a little rain, which is a little uncommon this time of the year in Southern California. So just wanted to get a little cozy, even though it is freaking heat wave 90 degrees. So I have a cool cup of tea next to me, and that's kind of how we're going to celebrate today's episode. So without further ado, let's kind of dive into some of your guys' questions. There were some really good ones. So one of the first questions is, how do I feel recording today's episode compared to my first episode? And I think that's a really good question because I feel so much more confident today than I did when I first started. When I first started recording episodes, I had such a strict, almost rehearsed kind of script I there we go. See, here's an example of that. A year ago, I would have restarted the entire recording just for messing up that one sentence. Today, I kind of just roll with it, go with it. I either stop, restart my sentence again, but I've really learned to just let a lot of things go. And I feel like, there's been a few episodes where I go off on a tangent and then I kind of forget where I went. And before I used to take that out and, restart whatever it is I was saying. But now I just kind of go with the flow because I want it to be a real conversation that you guys are hearing or are a part of. So I would definitely have to say, compared to my first episode today, I feel really, really confident. I also have less notes when I send my episode over to my editor, Cha. I think I used to have so many please remove this, please remove that, please remove, all of these. And now I just kind of let the microphone kind of go. And there's a few times I'll be like, oh, let me just restart that. But I've definitely given myself more grace with some of the mistakes I've made, or if I pronounce something different, which I've caught myself a few times, I kind of just like roll with it. I am still pretty strict. I do, like today's episode, I kind of have a little bit of a script. I have more like ideas of how I want to answer questions, but otherwise I'm kind of letting it just kind of free flow and see what comes to mind as I answer these questions on the podcast. So yeah, another question I had is, in which episode do I feel like I really evolved? And so kind of thinking about that is, I would say I felt a shift or a change. Maybe I evolved or again got more confident was my episode with Stephanie, which is episode number 16, the Ignite Your Bedroom with erotic blueprint expert, Stephanie Pappas. And she was my first guest on that wasn't family. So it was kind of a big deal. I was super nervous. I drove up to LA to go to her partner's recording studio. And it was just like, oh my gosh, this is like, usually it's just me at home recording with the microphone, or I had my mom on at the time, or Jessie. And so I was like, this is a big deal. Like, I am definitely like out of my comfort zone. But I would say that's the episode I really evolved in, from like where I was like, wow, like I have a real guest on, like I'm in a recording studio. So that was kind of a special, fun episode. Then I have a question, which this is probably one of my favorite questions, the question I love the most, is which episode was the most surprising? And I really had to think about that, of which episode really surprised me, because I wasn't sure if it was something I wasn't sure if I would want to answer is what did I learn that surprised me, or what really surprised me, that I ended up sharing. And so I would have to say that it would be episode number 28, The Road to Licensure. And it was the first episode where I was really vulnerable. And I guess vulnerable to the sense where I left my vulnerability. I didn't edit it out. That was the episode I shared a lot of personal information about going to urgent care, which is just like, I feel like I am still a private person, even though I do have my podcast now and I share more on Instagram and social media. I still have remained that like pretty private person when it comes to like my health and things that I'm going through there. And so in that episode, really surprised me that I opened up. And so that was a really big step. And it reaffirmed that, yeah. And I would say also another episode that surprised me, I guess to also kind of answer the question, is the episode, What Does an Architect Even Do? I was really surprised by how many downloads that episode got. I was just like, nobody really knows what an architect does. Why don't I just do an episode about it? And I didn't think it'd be as popular as it has been. And so that's been kind of a fun surprise, I guess, in a way too. And it's really reaffirmed that what I was putting out there was resonating with you, my listeners. And it's kind of like the turning point in my head too, where I was like, okay, I don't have to just share Vastu Shastra stuff. Like I could just share architecture because that's what I do day in and day out. So that was really fun to share with you and see how you guys responded to it. All right. Another question I have here is, during which episode did you learn the most, or did you enjoy the most? And I think that this is a pretty hard question, because I feel like there are so many episodes that I learned about maybe a person or a topic. There have been so many times that when I get edited episode back, I tell Jessie, oh my gosh, this is probably my favorite episode to date. And then the next week's episode is even more amazing. And the next week's episode is even more amazing. And so I feel like there's just so many episodes I record, and I have to say like probably some of my favorites are probably with a lot of the guests I've had on, because it's just been so amazing to have people take the time to come on, my little podcast. It's just me. It's nothing really, except for the one time there was a studio, but it's just me in my guest room with a microphone. And so I feel very grateful and honored that people want to come onto my podcast. It's really any episode with any of my guests. I have loved every one of my guests. There's not one guest I have not regretted or anything having on. They have all been absolutely amazing. But I would say if I had to pick one episode specifically that I enjoyed, it might be episode number 33, which is empowering women to connect to their body and mind during the birthing journey. Because for me, that was so fascinating to learn about like what a doula is, what a doula does, just kind of hear more of like some of her backstories. So that was just so interesting to me. And I'd really like to have Alexis back on because I think we talked about birthing in different cultures, and that itself just was really fascinating to me. So I think that was kind of one of my more favorite episodes. And then if I had to pick like an episode on like a deeper level, I would say the episode from last week with Jessie about we were celebrating our 1-year wedding anniversary. I feel like this is going to be a theme. Like at the end of September, you guys are going to hear like about our wedding anniversary, and then it's going to be like my podcast anniversary. But I think, last week's episode with Jessie was definitely one of my more favorite ones as well, because I think we both took away a lot from it. And I think we were both able to really reflect more than we would have otherwise had it been just us celebrating out at dinner our anniversary. We really got to sit down and reflect. And after we recorded the episode, we kind of were just like, oh, that was really nice. Like, when else would we have had that time? And we now also have that memory. We have that podcast episode as a memory to think about in the future. So for our 10-year and 20-year anniversaries, we can look back on how challenging the first year was, but yet amazing. So I would have to say, that was a really special episode for me. Now, this question is, who is your dream guest? And I have a few. So let's begin with the first one. My first dream guest would be Jennifer Aniston. I love Jennifer Aniston. I love Friends. I love every movie she's been in pretty much. I love Jennifer Aniston, and what she also loves is architecture and design. And so I would love to do some sort of like collaboration with her, and just to like sit down and talk to her about I know the house I think she still lives in right now, she's a very private person. And so when she was like designing the home, she was really personalizing it. And I would have loved to just kind of talk to her about kind of her thought process when designing her home and her spaces, and it would be so interesting to talk to her and to like collaborate with her or work for her. Like that would be kind of a cool dream job too, on like the architecture sense, is to be her architect, because I think she definitely has an eye for design, and it would be just really fun and special. And so then a lot of these people I feel like live in California, which is kind of funny. Another guest I think would be really, really interesting to have on, that I would love to have, is Meghan Markle. And I think the conversation that I really would want to have with her is, I've seen a lot of stuff about her home in Montecito right now, and she's kind of been opening up a little bit more about it. And I love Montecito. And we got engaged, we got engaged in Montecito in July of 2020. And that's when Meghan and Harry actually moved to Montecito. And it is such a magical place. And I read something about how when they were looking for the home, this home really like encompassed a lot of like their personality and just like the home that they were envisioning for themselves. And so I really want to, also talk with her through like how they found this home, how did it resonate with them? And then how have they kind of decorated? And I don't know if they remodeled or anything like that, but that would be really interesting to kind of see how they created that home. I know they have like chickens and stuff, and like they have this beautiful tree. And so I think it'd be really interesting from that aspect, political and everything aside. I don't really, I'm probably going to take that political thing out. See, but now I feel like because of this episode, I said I don't take things out. I'm realizing maybe I do take things out. Whatever. Maybe I'll just keep that in there so you guys get this real raw and unedited. There'll be like no editing for this episode required. Okay. Another dream guest, I know. So I have 4. Okay, we went through Jennifer Aniston, Meghan Markle. I think my third guest who would be amazing to have on is Michelle Obama. And I guess political side has nothing. Yeah, I don't really talk about politics. I don't really follow politics. I mean, I kind of follow. It's hard not to follow politics, I feel like. But Michelle Obama I would have on, because I would love to hear her story about how she turned the White House, one of the most famous, iconic buildings in the world, into a home for her family. Because I know, Barack was there and everything, and I'm sure they had decorators and stuff, but like you can tell that she really created this home for her family, for her daughters who were, young when they moved in. And she really seemed to connect with the staff and just create this just home in a And I'd love to hear her experience on, you're going to move into this place. It's supposed to be your home, but you may be there for 4 years, you may be there for 8 years, or maybe there's just so many different possibilities of you having to move out. And so I think it'd be really interesting to talk to her about kind of her experience and how she created that house, that building into a home, and kind of like the behind the scenes on how that all works. Because I know there's so much of the White House you can see, like as a visitor, as a tourist. There's also like the political area, the diplomatic areas where meetings are and offices and staff is. But there's like also that home residential area. And so it would be really cool to talk to her about that. All right. And then I would have to say my fourth and final guest, because the funny thing is like I always have only women on this podcast, but I think my fourth guest would be Antonio Gaudi, who is my favorite architect. Unfortunately, of all my dream guests, he is deceased, but he is hands down my favorite architect. I love his work. Barcelona, if you've ever been, you can see Sagrada Familia that is still currently under construction. There's the Casa Mila, and there's Casa Batillo. Yeah, Casa Batillo. And just his work just absolutely is incredible. I think the way he connected with nature and design and just the like organic shapes that he created is just absolutely astounding. And so to me, just to sit down with him and just to talk to him about kind of just his thought process, his design process, and just like watch him as he kind of goes through the whole process of from just concept to the final design. I think that would be so interesting. I think just like to pick his brain on like his design ideas and just maybe just go for a walk in nature with him and see what he kind of picks up on, what he resonates with, and then how he turns that into architecture. I think that would be really, really cool. And so speaking of guests, I got a question on where do I find my guests? And so my guests come from a very few various places. I would say, obviously, if there's family, Jesse, as my husband, I kind of pull him on the podcast, sometimes randomly, sometimes be like, hey, I need to do an episode. Can you like interview me? Or, hey, let's do something. Can you sit down with me? And so he just kind of shows up. I usually entice him with wine or champagne. I'm like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? So that's where I get some of my, I guess sometimes I call him my co-host, but he's really a guest. And I would say, of course, I've had my mom on twice now. I've had my cousin on. So I guess if you're family, you're probably going to get asked by me to be on. But if you're not family, and I do have some friends coming on, and I've had friends who have been on. So I think if you're a family member or a friend, your likelihood of getting asked to come on the podcast is highly likely. But if you are not related to me, then I will probably have found you maybe on Instagram, or I'm part of like a yearly membership with Rose Gold Goddesses. And so I've reached out to a lot of guests there or Instagram. And really, if I follow you on social media and I think you're interesting and I want to like learn more about whatever it is that you do, I will probably reach out to you and use the podcast as a way to be like, I want to get to know more about whatever it is, like whatever topic you're sharing, whatever you're an expert at or anything like that. And I'm going to say, it sounds so interesting. Like, do you want to be a guest on my podcast? I want to learn more about it. And so it's kind of in a way a selfish request because it's just me wanting to learn more. But I think the conversation then that I would have with this person would be very valuable. And I want to share that with you. So that's kind of where I think where I get my guests from. But yeah, it's just really anyone who I find interesting. So like I do have a special announcement at the end of this episode. I totally forgot to kind of plug in at the beginning of the episode, but if you're still listening, the special announcement coming up, yeah, I found a group of people that I'm very excited to kind of record and share their story. And I found all of them through Instagram and social media, except one person is semi kind of related to me by extension. So yeah, so that's kind of where I find my guests, long story short. And then how do you select who you want to have on the podcast? And is there any criteria you look for? So kind of like what I said in the last question, I definitely think if you're interesting, I'm going to reach out to you and be like, hey, I'd like to, have a conversation with you on my podcast. But one thing I've noticed is I've definitely gravitated more towards women and females, and just having them, or if you identify as a woman or female, I definitely have you more on my podcast because I work in a male-dominated industry. Every meeting I go to, I am usually the only woman. And so it is very refreshing to just, when I'm not at work or at my meetings, is I just get to be surrounded by other women. And so I know the only male guest I've had on is Jesse, obviously. And I don't know if I have plans in the future for another male guest. So, but that's not really a criteria. Again, I don't know, maybe I don't follow guys on social media, or maybe, I don't know, like I feel like I'm in like a little bit of the spiritual world. And then I follow some like architecture accounts that are probably run by men, but I just am so much more curious to learn about like the woman's perspective. So I guess it's not really a criteria, but it's something I've noticed I've gravitated towards. I don't look at your social media following. I had a guest come on and she was like, oh, I'm so surprised you asked me to be on. Like, I don't really even have that many followers. And I'm like, I don't really care how many followers you have. You have really interesting content and I love what you post and I think you're really interesting. So I've definitely don't check on how many followers you have on social media. Although maybe if you had 1 million, I think I would be a little like hesitant to reach out to you just because I feel like you'd maybe be out of my league. But otherwise, I don't really care about how many followers you have. And I think it really comes down to, if you're interesting, if what you have to say would resonate with my listeners, because I've kind of gotten a gauge now within this last year on, what episodes people have gravitated more towards and just kind of what I'm interested in as well. So I know I've definitely expanded from just Vastu Shastra because I've had guests that are doulas and health coaches and authors. So I've also don't want to necessarily be stuck in a box. So I've really given myself just any opportunity I find someone to be interesting. And sometimes I lead with when I reach out to people, I said, oh, I think, X, Y, and Z, whatever you do, I think it would really resonate with my followers because of this. And so far you guys have liked a lot of the episodes. So if there's anything you want me to kind of seek out, or if there's a guest you'd like on, or if you would like to be on the episode, absolutely reach out to me because I just think it's just been so fun. And I've kind of created like a real community in a way, like a small little community so far this last year. So it's been kind of fun, but I love having guests on. They make the episodes really fun. All right. And then how did the podcast change your life? It's a good question. I feel like it has changed my life in a way because I definitely feel more confident in not only how I express myself. I am okay. I feel fine listening to my sound of my own voice, because after this episode, what I'll do is I'll play it back, make any notes for Chad and say, remove this, remove that. Although, I don't know, I may keep this totally unedited. And then she sends it back to me with some edits, and once she edits it, so I listen back to it again, and then I also take some quotes from it, see what I want to use for social media. And so I've kind of listened to it. I listened to it 2 or 3 times before it airs. So I definitely have gotten used to the sound of my own voice, and I actually don't mind it. I think I've definitely slowed down in how I speak. I think I've also really learned to express myself not differently, but in a better way, if that makes any sense. I think before I used to speak really quickly and just kind of didn't really think. I feel like my thinking and my talking have slowed down. My thinking while I talk has slowed down. That's for sure. I definitely before my brain just goes like 1 million miles an hour and it can't keep up with when I speak. So I feel like I've kind of slowed that down for sure. And then another way that the podcast has changed my life, I think, is, as I mentioned, I feel like I've kind of started to build a small community that I love and I really want to cultivate and grow. Just growing my following slowly and, but surely on social media has been really fun. I feel like I've started to engage people that I otherwise wouldn't have, or I won't, I've sent messages or DMs to people just asking questions and become more confident in the social media space, which before Like if on my private account, I barely ever post, and now I'm posting so much. I guess I'm also not nervous to do like selfie stories, like Insta stories with just me on talking. That was just like a huge thing for me to do. I was so uncomfortable for the longest time. Just like I was like in awe of anybody who would just like go on their stories and just talk. And now I feel like I've gotten a lot more confident. I do have to thank my friend Stephanie, the same Stephanie from the what was the episode? I'm sorry. See, I'm going to keep this part in too so you guys get it real. Ignite Your Bedroom with Erotic Blueprint expert Stephanie Pappas. So I have to thank her because she really gave me the encouragement to just go on. So she's like, just go on, just sit with the camera in front of you, just do an Insta story. Don't think about it. Do one a day for like 30 days, which I didn't end up doing. But now I just jump on whenever I feel like it. And it's like, if anybody sees it, great. If nobody sees it, that's also great. It's just helping me with my confidence and my public speaking. So I would say in that ways, the podcast has changed my life. So, and then last question is, where do you see your podcast in a year from now? And I would say it would be growing, constantly growing, continue to have more guests on, maybe have past guests return, which if there's any guests that you resonated with as a listener and you would like to learn more about them or have them on, let me know, because the door is open to any guest I've had on thus far, because it has been super interesting. I've loved every guest I've had on. So I would say that it'd be really cool if I got a paid sponsorship with a company that I resonate with and believe in, for sure. That would be really cool, because right now this is definitely self-funded hobby, but it would be really cool if I could get some sort of income out of this. So, and maybe if you are a company that you want to work with me and you think this podcast would be a great platform for an ad or anything, or collaboration, anything to work with, work on together with, whatever, yeah, let me know, because I would definitely, the platform I use Podbean. I guess I'm sharing all my little secrets on how I run this podcast. So when I use Podbean, there is the opportunity to put ads in to the episode, and you can pick whatever spot you want to put an ad in. And I went back and forth at first. I said, should I put some ads in? Because maybe I can make whatever, a couple dollars here, a couple dollars there. But in hindsight, thinking about it, I know me as a listener of other podcasts. I don't like when there's just you're listening to this really great conversation, and then it's like, and you can save 15% on car insurance if you switch to blank. It's like, no, I kind of like when there's an episode where you're listening, and whoever the host is, they in their voice, they share an episode, an ad. I think I like that better. And especially if it's a company that they use. Like, for example, I love listening to the Lady Gang podcast. Actually, shout out to the Lady Gang podcast. They are on tour right now for their book tour. Their new book, second book, came out. But it's actually through the Lady Gang. They had a little podcast course, like a little booklet they put together. And that's actually what I used to put this podcast together. And so what I really like is what they do in their episodes when they have ads is they actually have ads with companies that they've been using prior to the ad. So it's not like they're like, oh, this is, a company we don't use. They really resonate with a company, which I think is really powerful. So I think that answers all the questions that I got. Yeah, I think I can't believe it's been a year. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for the past year. And so before we end, kind of want to do a little fun shout out to the country with the most downloads that I've received. So the country with the most downloads for all my episodes in total is, of course, the US. It's very popular at my podcast here. In second place is the United Kingdom. So that covers, obviously, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And yes, I'll keep that in too. And then third place, the Czech Republic, so the country I'm from, which is very exciting. And in fourth place, India. So I'm really grateful to all of you, my listeners, in all four of those places, as well as everywhere else in the world, which it's been amazing and just so incredible to see where all my listeners are from. I've been just so beyond grateful, really. And then just kind of give a shout out then to my US listeners. Okay, if we're doing honesty and transparency, I've had to stop the podcast a few times to clear my throat and have a drink of tea. But back to just give a little shout out to then my US listeners with the most downloads. Of course, in first place is my state of California. Thank you to everybody in California who listens. In second place is New York. Third place is Washington. And fourth place is Massachusetts. So California, New York, Washington, Massachusetts, thank you. It's kind of nice. It's got West Coast and the East Coast. So super grateful for all of you. And then just a little kind of fun thing at the end I wanted to share is my most listened to episodes to date. And I realize as I put these notes together, I don't know what the total is for each one, but in first place for the third time to be mentioned on today's podcast is episode number 16, Ignite Your Bedroom with Erotic Blueprint Expert, Stephanie Pappas. So super excited to share that episode. I will provide a link in the show notes for these episodes if you want to have a listen. In second place, episode number 26, which is Cruising Across the Atlantic with world traveler Katarina Denning, which is my mom. And third place is it's tied. First place, it's tied with obviously the intro to the podcast, so episode 1, and then also episode number 17, which is Vastu Shastra, starting with the basics. And that has been really cool for me to see that you guys are actually interested in Vastu Shastra, because for a little bit I was like, oh, that seems like a really niche subject that I'm going to cover, but it's been really fun to share that with you guys. And so then now, since we are at the conclusion of today's episode, it is time to share my special announcement. So I am beyond excited to share a very special series that I have been working on for the month of October. Each Friday, I will be sharing with you a conversation with another woman in architecture. So this series will be called Conversations with Women in Architecture, and I can't even begin to share with you how grateful I am for each and every one of the women who have taken the time to sit down with me and share their story. So it's actually technically it's 4 episodes, so every Friday in October, and it'll be 5 incredible women that I cannot wait for you guys to hear their stories. There's, a range of experience from fully licensed while some are in the midst of their architecture exams. It's a full spectrum. And each story, we talk about how they found architecture, what their journey has been like, because each story is just so unique and so different. And it makes me so proud to be among them in this crazy, ridiculous industry of architecture. So I'm super excited. Next week's episode will be the first one, so catch that. And thank you so much for listening. And thank you for listening all year long. And for whatever episodes you've tuned into, I am just so beyond grateful. So thank you so much. And if you like this episode, remember, please give it a heart or thumbs up and click the follow button so you can stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can follow me on Instagram at From the Honeycomb Podcast. Thank you so much, and see you next Friday. Also, I should add that this episode was done all in one take, which I don't think has ever happened. So thank you. I feel like I've gained so much confidence in this. And so again, thank you guys all so much for listening. I love you guys.